In this lesson, we'll talk about templates for the interview task, a small toolkit of ready-made phrases that can help you start each part of your answer without hesitating. We'll explain when templates help, walk through the phrase menus that go with the four-slot framework from our last lesson, and then build out a sample 45-second response together. So why are templates useful on this task? Because of the clock. The interview gives you 45 seconds per question and 0 seconds of preparation. As soon as the interviewer stops talking, the timer starts, and you're expected to be talking too. If you burn 5 seconds figuring out how to begin, you've already lost more than 10% of your time. Templates fix that problem with phrases like, "In my opinion, I believe that," or "A lot of it has to do with." Knowing a few phrases ahead of time makes it so that you're ready to deploy them right away. This organizational language comes out automatically, which frees up your brain to think about the actual answer. Before we dig in, let's be clear about what templates do and don't do. They give you language. They don't give you ideas, your reasons, your examples, your opinions. Those still come from you in the moment, based on the specific question you hear. The templates handle the general outline of your response so that your thinking can stay focused on the content itself, and the phrases help you better connect your ideas together. In our last lesson on organization and timing, we introduced the four-part shape of a strong interview answer: commit, detail, elaborate, and the optional finish: C, D, E, and F. Templates pick up right where that lesson left off. The four-part shape tells you what each part of your answer is supposed to do. The phrase menus in this lesson give you the actual language to start each part. The templates are linked below this video. You'll find a few core phrases per slot, plus extras for variety. There's also a menu of general transition phrases that work within or between your slots to keep your answer flowing smoothly. We'll talk more about those in an upcoming lesson. Ultimately, you're not supposed to memorize every entry. Pick 3 or 4 of your favorites per slot. Practice them until they're automatic, and then start swapping in your own phrasing as you get more comfortable. The menus are a launching point, not a finish line. In this video, we're going to do another sample interview question. For my response, I've decided to use the following phrases. You're welcome to use the same ones. However, I'd encourage you to look through the templates first to select some of your own favorites. This time, we'll answer the final question from the interview task that's been asking you about your experiences with taking photos. If you'd like to try responding on your own first, pause the video after the clip plays, and then give yourself 45 seconds to respond. Let's get started.
Good points. I just have one more question. In the future, do you think artificial intelligence will change the way most people take or share photos? Why or why not?
Welcome back. The interviewer says, in the future, do you think artificial intelligence will change the way most people take or share photos? Why or why not? This is a future prediction question, so the interviewer is looking for your opinion about how things might shift, so we need to pick a stance and explain it. For the commit slot, I went with, I tend to think that, a phrase from the variety side of menu 1 that sounds thoughtful. Filling it in. I tend to think that, yes, AI is going to change a lot about how we take and share photos. That's a clear stance with no hedging. For the detail step, I used, a lot of it has to do with, to open how I'm going to explain my position. That phrase from the menu is just there to help me get into the reasoning. The specific examples, the editing, removing, generating, are content that I'd come up with on the spot to make the answer concrete. I also used the transition plus to tack on an additional characteristic of these tools: ease of use. For the elaboration slot, I picked beyond that to start off my use of a different example, a real-world observation about AI's impact on social media and photo sharing. Notice that I also dropped in as a result between the last 2 sentences. Both of these help to structure the flow of my response. However, the most important thing is that I'm directly supporting my main opinion with another illustration. For the finish step, since I had a few seconds where I needed to keep talking, I picked a core phrase from menu 4. I think that pretty much sums it up. That also can serve as a quick transition into restating my overall opinion if need be. I think that pretty much sums it up. AI's impact on photos will keep growing and growing. To sum up, templates give you a way to launch each part of your response without thinking about how to phrase it. The CDE and optional F framework keeps your answer organized, and the phrase menus plus the transitions menu keep your delivery smooth. But the substance of your answer, the reasons you pick, the examples you give, that's where your score actually lives. Practice with the menus in front of you the first few times. Then practice cycling through different phrases across a full 4 question set. Then practice without looking. When the phrasing comes out without effort and the variations are starting to feel like yours, the templates and phrase menus have done their job. In our earlier lesson on speaking templates, we showed you certain phrases that can help structure your response. We also briefly mentioned transitions, which are phrases that can be used to connect the ideas between 2 sentences. This lesson takes a closer look at what transitions are, why they matter, and how to use them well. So let's take an example. I'm going to talk about a subject that I enjoy and why I enjoy it. And here are a few sentences from an answer. I've always enjoyed studying math. Math problems feel like puzzles to me. Figuring out an answer is very satisfying. Okay, that is a fine answer, but we can make it better. We can make it clearer by adding transitions like these. I've always enjoyed studying math, in part because math problems feel like puzzles to me. This gives a relationship. The listener can understand how the thoughts are related. Then we say, what I mean is that getting a correct answer is very satisfying. That shows the final sentence is a clarification. It is the same idea again in different wording. Native speakers use transitions like these all the time. It makes the thoughts that are said easier to understand. And remember, clarity is important. You need to be clear when speaking on test day. That's why transition words like the examples I just showed are important. They help you organize your ideas and show the relationships between thoughts. And just as importantly, they are just natural sounding. If you don't use transition words when you speak, you'll sound a bit like a robot, just listing things. By using transition words, the thoughts move comfortably from one to the next. Sentences are more varied, and overall pace is better. Without them, sentences feel short and not well connected. Now, there are many different types of transitions, but I'm going to give a few of them here. Let's say you want a transition that gives your opinion. Here's an example. If you ask me, schools should always serve vegetables. Continuing down this list, you can see there are different types of transitions for all different purposes. We've put together a comprehensive list, organized by what they do, like giving an opinion, listing reasons, and summarizing, into menu 5 of the template guide linked below this video. Now, using all of the transitions here on this chart inside a response would be a little much, but it's not too crazy to include one in every other sentence. In general, it's better to have too many than too few, but at the same time, repeating the same words and phrases many times isn't a good idea. So your interview answers probably won't look quite like this, and that's okay. But you'll want to practice using different transitions and learning new ones as you prepare for your test. So, how do you improve? What can you do to get better? I cannot stress this enough. This is so important. Study how to use the transitions you learn, not just their meanings. Don't just memorize meanings. Dictionaries only help a little bit. You need to know how to use it, and dictionaries don't do that. You need more than just a meaning. You need to see it in real text and how other people use it. If you don't understand the context, you might use it incorrectly, which can be very confusing to the listener. So when you do see a new transition phrase while reading, make note and underline it. Then look for examples online. From those examples, note the structure and the context. Is it positive? Is it negative? And note the meaning as you see in a dictionary. Altogether, this can help to learn the usage. But be careful. On your TOEFL, don't use a list of transitions which are new to you. This is very commonly a problem. Students learn all these meanings of transitions, and then they try to use lots and lots and lots of transitions in their answers, but they don't use them correctly. If you use transitions incorrectly, they are confusing. You need to use what you know is correct, and to learn that it's correct by reading a lot and paying attention to these structures. Transition words will help make your interview answers more natural and clearer, so they're worth studying as you prepare for your test. There are many different kinds, and using a variety of them well when speaking is a good idea. But be sure that you're using them correctly. As you learn new transition words and phrases, note examples to learn how they are used in practice and in what situations. Practice using them regularly when you speak, but avoid using any brand new vocabulary on your test. Stick with the vocabulary you know well from experience. Let's explore one particular problem that some English learners have. We're going to talk about conversational language and what kinds of language are not conversational and might not be right for the TOEFL. The interview questions on the speaking section are designed to sound like everyday conversation, and that affects the kind of English you should use. English changes depending on the situation you're in. The English you use at work is often different from the English you use in casual conversation. For example, business English often includes phrases like foster alignment or circle back. Technical English might use words like implement or parameters. Legal English uses very specific terms as well. All of these are correct forms of English, but they belong to different registers. The interview questions on the TOEFL expect conversational English, not overly professional or technical language. For many English learners, this can be tricky. If you use English mostly at work, especially in a technical or professional role, that vocabulary can start to feel natural to you. The problem is not that the words are wrong. The problem is that they can sound unnatural or overly formal in a conversational interview. This is a case of using the right words in the wrong situation. Let's look at an example. In the first response, the speaker uses business style language, talking about collaborative frameworks, alignment, and operational perspectives. This sounds professional, but it doesn't sound like normal conversation. In the second response, the speaker says essentially the same thing, but with simpler language, preferring group work, staying motivated, sharing ideas, and getting feedback. This second version sounds more natural and conversational, and is a better fit for a response to a TOEFL question. It's important to be realistic here. Using some formal or technical vocabulary is usually not a big problem. I don't want you to get more worried about this than is appropriate. The issue only comes up when it's very noticeable and makes your answer sound unnatural. This often depends on your background. If you regularly use English in a technical job or academic setting, your vocabulary choices may be influenced by that. The key is awareness, knowing when your language might sound too formal for the situation. One helpful way to check this is to record your spoken responses and write out what you said. You can then use an AI tool like ChatGPT or Gemini to help analyze your language. For example, you can ask whether any words or phrases sound like an inappropriate register for conversational English. This can help you identify patterns in your speech that you might not notice on your own. If you get feedback pointing out certain words or phrases, focus on those specific items. Notice which ones sound more professional, technical, or academic than conversational. Then think about how you could say the same idea more simply. This is not about dumbing down your English. It's about matching the situation. To summarize, different situations require different kinds of English. The TOEFL interview task expects a conversational register. Clear, natural language is more effective here than professional or technical wording. Not everyone struggles with this, but if you do, it's worth checking. Writing out your responses and reviewing your vocabulary choices can help you sound more natural and confident on test day. When you are doing the interview task on the speaking section of the TOEFL, you'll need to speak for 45 seconds on a simple topic. Sometimes it's hard to fill that time. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on one way to fill the time by giving examples and inventing details. The types of questions you'll be asked during the interview vary, but there are a few very common types. Often, the first question just asks about your general experience. Then, they usually go a bit deeper and ask you to choose a preference between some options. Sometimes, they also ask about what you think might happen in the future. Regardless of the type of question, examples can help make your answer clearer, more organized, and easier for a listener to follow. Here's a sample interview question about reading habits. This would be the first question in the interview because it's very general, just about your personal life. The interviewer asks when you usually read and how much time you spend on it in a typical week. Because the question is so simple, it might be tempting to give a very simple answer like, I like to read in bed at night. I probably read for 5 hours per week, but that's too short. So adding a short example, like a recent week or a specific routine, can help you give a fuller, more natural answer and better fill the time. Now, you might be thinking about how little time to prepare you have. In fact, you don't have any time to prepare. So it might be hard to think of good examples and details from your life immediately, but it's important to remember that the interview task is not a test of honesty. The TOEFL is testing communication. Clear, logical, and well-explained answers matter more than whether every detail is true. When you're talking about personal experiences, your stories do not need to be true, as long as they sound reasonable and support your point. Okay, so how do we create a good example? There are a few ways. First, you can take from your actual life and experiences. That can be quite easy because the details already exist, but they can sometimes be hard to make relevant. For the question about reading habits, you might want to talk about reading social media posts or emails for work or school. But at the same time, talking a lot about social media might change the topic too much. On the other hand, pure fiction is easy to make relevant but harder to fill with convincing details. Lying can be difficult, so one strong approach is to mix the two and tell a lie based on real life. Start with a real memory or situation, then invent details to make it more complete. Looking again at the question about reading habits, here's how I personally might respond to it. The first thing that comes to mind is that I sometimes read in bed at night, so that's my starting place. But that's not enough by itself. So I keep talking and say that I like to read until I fall asleep. Then I have an idea for a little lie to give more detail. I had a good book last week, and I stayed up late reading every night. Whether that truly happened or not is unimportant. It gives concrete, real-world context for my answer, and helps me to keep speaking for the full 45 seconds. By adding that detail, I've gone further than just saying, I like to read in bed at night for an average of a couple hours per week. This longer answer with more detail is more likely to score well. And here's what a full response to the question might look like. Honestly, I'd say I do most of my reading in bed at night, usually for about half an hour before I fall asleep. It mostly comes down to that being the only quiet time in my day. That's when I can finally focus on the book and enjoy it without being distracted. So I typically read for 2 hours per week, but not always. Just last week, actually, I was really enjoying a sci-fi novel that a friend lent me. I stayed up well past midnight a couple of nights in a row, which was far longer than I had intended. So sometimes I might even read for more than 1 hour at night. All the highlighted phrases are from our speaking templates. Those provided some structure to my response, but most of my response is really just invented details and made up examples. All right, let's wrap it up. Communication is more important than honesty in interview questions. Use real experiences when they fit naturally, and invent or adjust details when needed. It's okay to start with a truth and then just lie to make it more complete. Focus on clarity, relevance, and explanation wherever it comes from, which could be from true experiences or from invented examples. It really doesn't matter, as long as you are showing your skills with the English language. That's what the TOEFL cares about in the end. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the listen and repeat task in the TOEFL speaking section. This task is very different from the interview task because you don't need to think of your own ideas or even use your own words. Your only job is to listen carefully to a short sentence and repeat it exactly as you heard it. That's all there is to it. The format is very simple. You'll hear a short sentence one time, and then you repeat it. You'll also see a small image on the screen, but the image is only a visual reminder of the situation. It is not something you describe. There are 7 of these in a row, each played only once. They all relate back to the same topic, but that doesn't even matter really. The content isn't important, just your ability to repeat the sentence clearly. That's the main point of this task. It tests your pronunciation skills, how well you hear English sounds, and how well you can reproduce them. Pronunciation isn't just about making individual sounds correctly, though. It's also about how the sentence sounds as a whole, using rhythm, stress, and intonation. Other than pronunciation, the task does test short-term memory, because you need to keep the full sentence in your mind long enough to repeat it. But the sentences are short, so this isn't a large factor. And because you have the exact sentence that you need to say, the task is not testing grammar or vocabulary. It focuses only on how you produce the sounds of English. Repeating a sentence after hearing it just once can feel difficult because you only get one chance to speak. If you weren't listening closely, you won't be able to listen again. And if you have trouble with a word or make a mistake when speaking, you won't be able to record your version again. So partly, this can be tough just because of the format of the task. It's not something you do when making conversation, but that part can get easier with practice. On the other hand, the main challenge here is pronunciation because it can also be tricky to improve, especially if English sounds are very different from your first language. Stress and rhythm may also feel unfamiliar. Often, English learners don't focus much using English's rhythm when they speak, nor on improving pronunciation of the sounds that are difficult for them. So a task that focuses so much on these aspects can be a little scary. But again, practice is super helpful for this task, even more so than many other tasks on the TOEFL. A good way to approach this task, and when practicing for it, is to focus on imitating the sound of the speaker, not on what feels natural to you. Listen closely to the melody of the sentence, the stressed syllables, and the overall flow. When you repeat the sentence, try to sound exactly the same as what you heard, including everything. That means not just using the same words, but imitating the speaker completely. And if you miss one word, don't worry. Repeat confidently with the parts you did understand. That's better than missing points completely. Maybe you can guess what many of the common problems are on this task. English pronunciation isn't the most difficult of all languages, but there are some very typical issues people have. Many learners struggle with English sounds that don't exist in their own language. There are a few listed here, but the ones that are difficult for you personally may be different. You know the sounds that are toughest for you. Some students ignore the natural rhythm and stress of English and speak too slowly or too quickly. In general, the problem is that people speak in a way that feels comfortable, based on the sounds and rhythms of their native language, instead of using the sounds and rhythms specifically for English. The goal is to imitate, even if it feels unusual at first. It's okay to be uncomfortable when practicing. Next, you'll have the chance to do 4 short examples. We'll only do 4 in this lesson, but again, there will be 7 of them on an actual TOEFL. After each example, we'll show the sentence on the screen so you can try repeating it again. On the TOEFL, you will not see the text. You only hear it once. We're including the text in this lesson just for help in practicing, and to give you the opportunity to do each one twice. First without seeing the text, and then again while looking at it. Your goal is to match the recording as closely as possible. All right, so let's try it.
You are training to work at a hotel front desk. Listen to your supervisor and repeat what he says. Repeat only once.
Greet each guest politely as they arrive. Greet each guest politely as they arrive. Confirm their reservation using the hotel system. Confirm their reservation using the hotel system. Provide a room key and explain how to reach their floor and their room. Provide a room key and explain how to reach their floor and their room. Inform guests about complimentary breakfast hours and other hotel amenities. Inform guests about complimentary breakfast hours and other hotel amenities.
Okay, how did that feel? It's a bit strange, isn't it? But it's great pronunciation practice. This is an exercise that's great for improving pronunciation even outside the context of the TOEFL. I highly recommend doing a lot of this type of practice before your test day, not just with TOEFL questions, but with anything you listen to. Now let's summarize what we discussed. This task is all about pronunciation, not about content or ideas. Focus on the sound of the sentence, the rhythm, and the pacing. You don't need to prepare or plan anything. Your only job is to listen carefully and repeat what you heard. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but that's normal. With practice, copying native rhythm and sound patterns will become easier. In our first lesson, we talked about how the listen and repeat task is primarily about pronunciation and mimicking the speaker. In this lesson, we're going to add a technique that can make mimicking easier, especially as the sentences get longer. Here's the problem. Trying to repeat a sentence by holding every single word in your head, word by word, can be a challenge. Short sentences are fine. Your brain can hold a handful of words easily. But by the end of the set, the sentences get longer, and holding on to every single word becomes difficult. The better way is to listen for ideas, not words. Take a sentence like, our espresso bar runs on a simple rhythm. That's 7 words, but really it's 2 ideas. Half of the sentence is an action that happens, our espresso bar runs, and the other half is a description that describes how. In this case, that how is on a simple rhythm, and remembering 2 chunks, an action and a how, is easier than remembering 7 individual words. We can call each of these ideas a chunk. A chunk is just a meaningful piece of the sentence. Most chunks are one of a few types: an action, an object, a place, a time, or a purpose. Short sentences usually have 1 or 2 chunks. Longer sentences can have 3 or 4. You're never holding more than about 4 chunks at a time, no matter how long the sentence gets. That's the trick. To best take advantage of chunks, it also helps to know what kinds of sentences are coming on the test. Listen and repeat sets follow this structural pattern. The first 2 sentences are short, about 6 to 9 words. The next 3 are medium, around 9 to 11 words, and the last 2 are long, around 13 to 15 words. Let's walk through each one to see the kinds of grammar, and thus the kinds of chunks they typically use. The first sentences in a set almost always come as a simple command. They often open with words like start by, begin by, or first. For example, start by checking the orders. Begin by wiping down the counter and sink. First, wash your hands with soap. Most short sentences have 1 or 2 chunks, an action, sometimes followed by an object or a place. Let's try one. All the questions in this lesson are about a neighborhood cafe where a manager is teaching you how to make espresso drinks during the morning rush. As we've discussed, try to identify the chunks as you listen, and then repeat. I'll play the clip now.
Grind the beans fresh for each new drink.
Chunks in that example were grind the beans fresh, and for each new drink, an action and a purpose. 2 chunks, that's the basic short shape. The middle sentences generally add one of 3 common chunks to a basic command. The first possible chunk is a purpose, using to plus a verb or for plus a noun. For example, to keep the line moving, or for extra support. The second is a time, using words like before, after, when, or once. For example, before the next customer arrives, or when the stove is hot. The third is a description of where or how, usually a prepositional phrase like on the counter or with careful balance. Here's another example for you to try. Once again, listen for 2 or 3 chunks in this clip.
Steam the milk slowly until the foam looks silky.
In this case, the chunks were steam the milk slowly and until the foam looks silky, an action and a time. The word until was your cue, and it lets you know what kind of chunk, one about time, is coming up. The last 2 sentences tend to be longer and can take a handful of common shapes. One common shape asks you to do 2 or 3 things, joined together with and. For example, stack the boxes and put them on the shelf, or with more pieces. Sort the packages, weigh each one, and label them for delivery. Each action is its own small chunk, and the word and is your cue that another piece of the same type is coming. Another common shape is a softer kind of instruction, rather than a direct command. These often start with words like you can or you may. Other common forms are make sure to or remember to. For example, you can pour the steamed milk into the cup once the espresso has settled. 3 chunks there, an action, you can pour the steamed milk, a place, into the cup, and a time, once the espresso has settled. A third common shape starts with a time or purpose chunk before the main action. These often begin with after or before, or for or to. For example, after each customer, wipe down the counter. The time chunk, after each customer sets the scene. Then the speaker usually pauses a bit for the comma, and then the action chunk, wipe down the counter, tells you what to do. Another example, for the best espresso, use fresh beans every time. Less commonly, you might hear a long sentence that adds an extra description with that or who. For example, customers who pay with cash get a small discount. The chunks there are a long noun phrase telling us who we're talking about, and that's then followed by the action. Or you might get an if-then sentence like, if the line gets too long, call for backup, which splits the sentence into 2 chunks by default. The if half sets things up. The comma is a pause, and the second half tells you what to do. Here's one final example for you to try, so listen to this clip.
If the drink looks wrong, set it aside immediately and prepare a fresh one.
That example actually combined 2 of the shapes we just talked about. It's an if-then structure. If the drink looks wrong, sets up the situation, and the second half tells you what to do about it. And that second half combines 2 action chunks with and, set it aside immediately, and prepare a fresh one. An important reminder on all of this. Chunking is a memory aid. It's not a tool for building the sentence yourself. You're still repeating what you heard. The speaker's exact words, their stress, their melody, all of that stays. Don't paraphrase your chunks, and don't try to produce the sentence from your understanding of the grammar. Listen, hold the chunks, and mimic. To summarize, listen for ideas, not words. Most sentences break into 2, 3, or 4 chunks, types like action, object, place, time, or purpose. Expect short commands at the start of a set, followed by mid-sized sentences that add a purpose, a time, or a longer description. The last 2 sentences are longer and may add more of the same, or little twists, like softer commands or more complex structures like if-then statements. Use those patterns to help you anticipate what you'll hear, not to predict word for word. Lastly, this is a method to help your memory. Your ultimate job on this task type is still to mimic what you hear. In this lesson, we're going to look at how your response is scored and where most students lose points. The 2 are connected. Knowing what graders care about tells you where to put your attention. Here's the rubric in plain language. The top score is a 5, and it requires an exact repetition that's fully understandable. A 4 is still a strong score. You captured the meaning, with maybe 1 or 2 function words missing or changed. A missing tense ending, a small word swap, or 2 words in the wrong order. A 3 means the sentence is full, but multiple words were missing or changed, or you struggled more with pronunciation. A 2 is when you missed a significant portion of the sentence. A 1 is mostly hard to understand, and a 0 is no relevant response. A few things stand out. First, the perfect score requires that every word be there, the small words too. Second, the rubric is forgiving of minor slips at the 4 level, so don't freeze if you miss something. And third, stopping in the middle of a sentence is much worse than producing an imperfect full one. If you blank on a word, push through with what you have. Now, here's a common thread that runs through most of the points students lose on this task. When native speakers speak, they compress small, unstressed sounds. These compressed sounds are then hard for non-native speakers to hear. And, if you don't hear them, you can't repeat them. Two kinds of compressed sounds are especially common: function words and the endings of certain content words. Function words are the small connecting words of, in, at, on, to, for, is, and, as well as articles like the, a, and an. They can't carry the meaning of the overall sentence themselves. Instead, they show how the meaningful parts of the sentence fit together. Native speakers compress function words a lot when they speak, which is why they sound quieter and faster than the content words around them, so it's easy to miss them and then not include them in your response. So, how do you make sure you catch the function words when they're so easy to miss? This is where the chunking concept from the last lesson really helps. The content words that you can hear more easily likely give you an idea of what type of chunk you're dealing with, and the type of chunk hints at what kinds of function words it may use. For example, a place chunk needs a word like at, in, or on, plus the place itself. At the desk. In the bin. On the shelf. A purpose chunk usually needs to plus a verb, as in to attach to each package, or for plus a noun, as in for delivery. A time chunk needs a word like before, after, until, or once, plus an event, before setting it down. Take a sentence like sort the morning packages into the correct bins, and let's pretend you didn't perfectly hear into. If you caught all the content words, then you likely heard the action chunk and the place chunk. Something needs to connect those two pieces, and placing something into something else is a common situation in real life, and so into is that function word. Here's a practice question for you to try. As you listen to the clip, try to catch all the small function words.
Check the address before placing it in the bin.
That sentence included the article the twice, and it also had two main function words, before and in. Notice how each one was doing a particular job for its chunk. Before started a time chunk, before placing it, and in started a place chunk, in the bin. If you recognize the chunks of the sentence, those small words are easier to identify and recall. In contrast to function words, content words are the ones that carry the meaning of the sentence. These are the nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Words like package, weigh, fresh, carefully. They get stress when we speak, so they sound clearer and louder. Thus, you usually can hear them. So, the main mistake with content words isn't usually missing them. It's saying them back unclearly. The rubric specifically calls out content words being ambiguous because of imprecise pronunciation. So once you've caught the content words, deliver them with a clean, firm pronunciation. With that said, there is often one piece of content words that students do miss more frequently, and that's the endings of content words. These endings are also often compressed by native speakers, so they can be harder to catch when you're listening. The most commonly missed endings are the S ending for both plural nouns and third-person verbs, the ED ending for past tense, and a T or a D at the end of words. Unlike function words, you can't really anticipate them through the chunk shape of the sentence. You don't see the sentence ahead of time, so you don't know what's plural or past tense until you hear it. So as you listen, pay close attention to the very ends of words. Put another way, for this task, the form of the content word is just as important as the content word itself. Here's another listen and repeat example for you to try. In particular, pay close attention to the endings of any content words in the clip this time.
Stack the sealed boxes on the outgoing shelf.
So, did you catch the special endings? And, for that matter, did you catch the cases where the content words did not have special endings? The content words are stack, sealed, boxes, outgoing, and shelf. Now, depending on the particular sentence, some native speakers might stress those special endings more than others, but the ED ending of sealed and the ES ending of boxes are exactly the kinds of endings to listen for beyond just the content words themselves. To recap, every word counts towards your score, including the small ones. The most common mistakes are missing function words and missing word endings, both because native speakers compress them and they're hard to hear. For function words, thinking about the jobs of the chunks can make it easier to identify these function words. For special word endings, be sure to especially pay close attention to the end of each word as you listen. And, in general, aim to pronounce the content words clearly and crisply, since mispronunciation is the other main issue with this type of word.